Welcome to the Mind of Biz podcast. I'm your host, Ms. Rivera. We just got done recording about an hour and 20 minutes, I think, of just awesome conversation talking about the dangers of disarming citizens. If you are against the Second Amendment, if you really don't like guns, that's not your thing. I really think you should listen to this. We come to some pretty interesting conclusions here that I think are going to be able to help you think about this in a different way. If you're someone who's pro-guns and you love the Second Amendment, but you don't know a whole lot about why we actually have it and why it's there and why it's important, we have a lot for you as well, okay? So please, if you're interested in this topic, just give us the next hour, 20 minutes. Listen to it. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the Mind of Miz podcast. I'm your host, Ms. Rivera. Today, we're going to be talking about the dangers of disarming citizens. That's right. What happens when your guns are taken away? Now, I kind of chuckle on the inside when I say that because there has been a characterization of gun owners all across America, typically by the left, of what kind of people they are and how they cling to their guns, if you remember the old Obama quote. But we actually want to take a serious look at this and see what are the real dangers when the state is actively trying to infringe upon your right to keep and bear arms. And so we know that's the Second Amendment that we've been looking at now. This is the second week. We may not have an opportunity to go further into this subject beyond this week for this series in particular. But we do want to at least finish some of the thoughts that we started in our last episode. So if you want to make sure you get all the information that we have here, make sure you go to our previous episode. That's going to be lesson 4 in the Bill of Rights. You can find that on Spotify. We have everything there, but we also have it on YouTube and Rumble. And you can go ahead and watch those there. But before we get started, real quick, just 2 things that I want to talk to you about. The first is we did have this giveaway here with the Constitution of the United States, this book right here. And we actually ended up giving 3 of these away. They're actually going to be mailed here in the next day or so. We have them all boxed up, ready to go. We just got to get that out to you guys. But we want to thank our winners. We had 3 winners, and they are in no particular order: Jalen, Bob, and Victoria. And we just want to say thank you to you for subscribing. Thank you for supporting and listening and watching. And the feedback that we get from y'all is so important, and it really helps us keep going. And so we just want to take a little moment here to say thank you so much. If you haven't subscribed to the Mind of Miz podcast and you enjoy what we're doing, I would ask that you please do that. Subscribe, like, follow, all that good stuff, because it's going to help us grow. It's going to help us get the message out to the masses, which is only part of what we want to do, but it's an important part of what we want to do. So let's jump in here to our topic today, the dangers of disarming citizens. And I want to quickly point out here just a few things. The first being that whenever you see a movement that is trying to disarm the citizenry, or the citizens of a country, okay, the people of a country, let me say that's a lot easier to say. It's really part of a culture of death. Okay. And I want to give you some quick examples of this, because you might think to yourself, well, how is gun control, right? That's what I'm talking about here when I say the disarming of citizens. We're talking about gun control. That would be the political language that's being used nowadays. Or gun violence. That's another good one, okay? Which, by the way, there's violence of all kinds. And but the one that they really focus on is gun violence, okay? And there's a reason for that. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think it has to do with violating your natural right to keep and bear arms. But here are the examples before I get too off on a tangent there. Part of the culture that we're talking about here is what we would call a culture of death. Okay, and this is emanating namely from the left. That's not to say that there are people on the right who would agree to a certain extent with some of these issues. But it's really the left that is pushing this culture of death. And I'll just give you a couple of examples here. Think of abortion, right? Abortion is the taking of a human life. Now, some might argue and say, well, it's just, it's not a human yet. They're not born yet. So it's technically not a human. They don't technically have rights. And if you want to have that argument, that's fine. But you're gonna have to admit that you're taking some kind of life at some point. Now, of course, I believe personally that a child in the womb is as much a human as a child that's outside the womb. Okay, that's where I stand on that. But abortion is a huge thing, and it's part of the culture of death, and is constantly being pushed. And then we have here's something you may have not heard of recently, anyways. Is they don't push this as much in the mainstream media, but it's out there. And I've read several books on this, and it's the population control. Now, with population control is interesting because I've actually been wanting to do a series on this for a while now. I've read several books on the question, and I really kind of want to take some time. And so maybe in the future, that'll be something that we might be able to do. But population control is the idea of how do we get the world to have lesser humans in it so that we may be able to save the planet. It's an extension of climate discussions and climate ideology and this kind of thing. And so you have population control. Now, one of the things that I found very, very interesting in my study of population control was that the use of abortion was huge. This is a big part of what they utilize, okay? Now, think about that. It's interesting because population control is about controlling the human population, right? And one of the biggest things that they want to do with that is make abortion more accessible to women that may not have it. Well, aren't you by extension calling those babies in the womb human? If your end goal is population of human, making that less, controlling that. So anyways, again, I don't want to get off on another tangent here, but we also have this third problem, which is the problem we're going to talk about today, and that's the disarming of the people, okay? And as we're going through this, if you listen carefully, you're going to see how this is part of the culture of death, okay? But before we get into that in particular, what does the law teach or say about guns and the keeping of arms? Okay, now you'll probably hear me talk a lot about guns because that's basically what we think of when we think of the Second Amendment. Okay, we're not thinking about swords or anything like that. Nunchucks, that kind of thing. You're normally thinking about guns. Okay, But please understand, I'm talking about strictly here the right to keep and bear arms. Now, what does the law teach us about this? Okay, well, it teaches us that anyone that's a citizen can carry a weapon. Now, there's going to be, some restrictions there, obviously, children, that kind of thing. But broadly speaking, the idea is that the citizens of a country are able to carry, to keep, and bear arms. Now, I have to remind you here about what we've said in other episodes previous to this one. And it's that the citizen is actually in office, if you think about it the right way. And so, for example, Why is it that the state always wants to take away, from the citizen who holds the office of citizen, and it's a lifelong office that you hold? They always want to take away our rights, but you never see them minimizing the rights of those that hold office of president or secretary of state, or secretary of defense, or governor, or representative, or senator, These are all offices. And so we have a constitution that regulates, or is supposed to at least regulate, all of these things. And I think often we don't think ourselves as holding an office of citizen, where as holders of that office, we have a right, and we have a legal right as well. Now, we also have a natural right as individuals, and we're going to talk about that too. But I wanted to point that out so that we keep in mind our positions as citizens. It's very important. We're not subjects of the state, right? We're not just the minions of those that are in power. We're not just slaves. We are citizens. And that is important for us to keep in mind, and in a sense, to keep our dignity, to hold our head up high, and to know that we also have these rights and that the state cannot infringe upon them. And this is, part of the reason why we're even going through the Bill of Rights, is to awaken that mindset again in Americans, because often we want to let the state do so many things because we feel that they may have the capacity to do it. Although, that seems strange, because one of the things we criticize a lot is politicians and the state. And yet increasingly we allow them to continue to infringe upon our rights. And of course, the Second Amendment is something that they're constantly, particularly from the left, coming against us with trying to infringe that right. Well, the second thing that the law teaches is three things that we're going to say here. The first is that any citizen can carry, generally speaking. The second is that weapons are for self-defense, That is that a weapon, when you have the right to keep and bear arms, it's not so that you can go around shooting people, It's not so that you can go scare people, rob people, mug people. That is what criminals do, We're citizens, and we should be upstanding or outstanding citizens that are trying to live good and moral lives, And so we have the right to carry, but we do it in order to be able to defend ourselves and our property, our loved ones, that kind of thing, The third thing is this, that the law does not assume that you want to commit murder. Now, this is important because the idea here is that when someone uses a gun, let's say, in self-defense, and they were carrying this weapon on their person, the assumption of the law is not that that person is guilty of murder, but that that person, was carrying in order to defend themselves. Now, that does not mean, obviously, that a person could have used it in the wrong way. And this is something that I'll try to emphasize. And if I don't emphasize it as much, I want you to know now that our right to carry, to have a gun, is for self-defense. And the assumption should never be, that it is for any other reasons, that particularly that constitute hurting someone else or infringing upon their natural rights. In other words, shooting them because you're mad at them, jealous, anything like that. Now, the problem here that we happen to encounter in our society is the public opinion of a person that carries a gun, And now I will admit here that I'm generalizing somewhat, but I don't think I'm that far off. And if you wanna wrangle with me on this, then you can. But The first thing I would say about the public opinion about guns is that some people are assuming that you want to hurt somebody, that you're kind of itching for someone to try to come and mug you so you could shoot them, that you're itching for something to pop off somewhere at the store so you could be the guy with the gun and save the day. And I'm not saying that there might be people that are like that, that wait their whole lives for that moment where they can, shoot their weapon. But generally speaking, that's not true. Generally speaking, people that carry firearms do so for protection, okay? If you've ever done any kind of security or any kind of armed security, which I've been a part of, at different points of my life, what you'll understand is that you're not there to try to hurt anybody, and you're not carrying your firearm because you want to hurt someone that day. You're carrying your firearm because if something were to happen, if someone were to come harm the protectee, the person that you're protecting, let's say, you want to be able to defend them, defend yourself as well. Okay, so the mindset is different. And one thing that you'll find if you actually talk to gun owners is that this is generally the way that they think about these things. They don't want to find themselves in a situation where they cannot defend themselves, the people they love, their property, that kind of thing. Now, the other thing is similar. Okay, so we have the assumption that, well, maybe they just want to hurt somebody. Maybe they just want to shoot their gun at somebody at some point in their life. That's one assumption. The second point is somewhat related to that. It is that some people just feel threatened by the fact that someone owns a gun, even if it's illegal. They just feel threatened. They think that you shouldn't have that because it threatens me. It makes me feel a certain way. And well, there's a problem with that, isn't there? Because you may be a docile person. We talked about the violent versus the docile person last week, and we may touch on that here just briefly. But the idea there is something like, hey, I don't like guns. I don't like knives. I don't like blood. I don't like any of that. And so I'm a pacifist, whatever it might be. And I want to personally never carry that. But then to push that further and say, well, neither should you. This is where we come into some problems. Now, honestly, I don't know how much of the population actually thinks that way. I don't know. I don't have the numbers on that. But it seems to me when I observe, politicians, I don't think they necessarily think about it that way, because most politicians, at least, the high level politicians, they have security guards that have weapons. And they may even have their own weapons at home. Who knows? And so clearly there's going to be a different way of thinking about these things at different levels and with different people. But either way, one could be against guns, let's say, or against the Second Amendment itself. And I actually was searching this, and it's amazing how many people ask this question. Why don't we just do away with the Second Amendment? Why don't we just repeal it? Why do we even need it? Let's get rid of it. We should just confiscate all guns. It's these very broad terms that people utilize without really thinking of the dangers, again, of disarming the citizens. And this is why I want to talk about this, because if I can at least get you to think about this in a different way, not because I want you to go, be a Republican or something like that, or vote for my guy, because these rights they're not about Democrat or Republican. They're really about your natural rights. Okay. For your ability, for example, with the Second Amendment, to be able to defend yourself. So we have to ask then, if the public opinion is negative, well, what drives that negative public opinion about guns? And I think we have to at least think about this just for a little bit. And I think part of that is that gun control laws, for example, disarm people. And if I don't have a gun, well, maybe you shouldn't have a gun either. And the problem to that, though, is that criminals keep guns, right? And unarmed people know that criminals have guns. And so what happens? Well, they want to keep pushing the gun laws further. Okay, so it works something like this. At least I think it works something like this. You have a gun control law, and a certain amount of the population says, okay, these are the gun control laws, and maybe I can't have all these guns, and so I'm being disarmed. Okay, maybe you have one gun instead of 10 or 5 or whatever it is. Or maybe now you have none because it becomes so annoying to try to carry a gun, or there's so many laws that if you fire your weapon, you're going to have to answer to, 5 different agencies, and it's just going to be a headache. And because it's such a headache, I'm just going to not have one. It's easier, right? And then I kind of understand that perspective as well. It's always, if you're carrying, if you're someone who carries, you always got to be careful where you're going. I can't go in that store because they have a policy. And so it's tough, right, to try to navigate these things. And you got to do your best that you can. But I understand, that sometimes people get a little overwhelmed with it. They're just like, I'm not going to carry at all. And I won't even have one at home. It's just too dangerous. I'm not going to deal with it. Well, the problem with that is that the minute you're disarmed, well, you want the other person to be disarmed too. But because there are people, and in this case, I'm thinking of criminals in particular, that are never going to give up their guns, right? I mean, that's just the reality of it. They're never going to give up their arms, never. And that they are willing to hurt you with that. And your knowledge of that is going to cause you to say, well, then we need more gun control laws. And I think we kind of see this happen every time there's a shooting, right? Every time there's a mass shooting anywhere in the United States, the typical talking point is we need more gun control. We need more gun laws. We need to be able to push this further, and further. And the problem with that is that it kind of feeds on itself. And at some point, I think we need to just, stop and ask ourselves, wait, what is the danger of disarming the people? Okay, and that's what we want to kind of get to here. The consequence, of course, of gun control laws, if you were to push this all the way to its logical conclusion, is that only the state is left with guns. Okay, and they'll take the guns away even from the criminals. They'll hunt them down like dogs and take away their guns, and then nobody has, but only the state. You'll never see the state going, throwing their guns away. You'll never see that. It's just not going to happen. Okay, so let's give some historical context to this because we've been talking about this, and so let me give you some examples. Okay, and this is stuff that you can look up. Plenty of books out there about this and stuff online that you can look up. There was a place, the Weimar Republic, we're talking about Germany here, called the Weimar Republic at the time. This was in the 1920s. Now, this is also technically considered also a period, the Weimar Republic. So anywhere between 1918 to about 1933, right around there, is the Weimar Republic. And the Weimar Republic was the government that came in Germany, okay, after World War I, and it's the one that preceded the Nazi regime, okay? So it wasn't there for many years, okay, 15 years or so, but it has an interesting kind of hold on the minds of people. People that study it and look at it see this as a very progressive time. As a time where social experiments were being tried and people really wanted to do something different. A part of the problem there was that, the idea of the 1,000-year reign was on the minds of many people. And of course, with World War I, that hadn't come to fruition. So you had some people that were simply, just not feeling good about themselves. And in some ways, the society started looking for ways to fix that. What can we do? What kind of government can we form? What kind of society should we have? And they started pushing the envelope on different things, okay? And it really started going against traditional thought and just pushing the envelope. There's nothing wrong with pushing the envelope in some sense, okay? We wanna have advances, right? We wanna have better healthcare. We wanna have better medicine, better computers, technology, science. All of those things are important, certainly. None of that we don't want to do away with any of that. But there are certain things in society that have become over time traditional for a reason. And so when you start pushing against that, then you have some serious consequences. And disarming people, for example, is one of those. And it's unfortunately something that's happening in our country. There is a push to try to, get people to have no weapons, okay, or have the minimal amount of weapons. And there's a problem. So let's look at this. In 1920, the Weimar Republic made gun registration mandatory, okay? So gun registration, if you don't know exactly what that is, just think about you buy a gun and you have to provide a government ID, your name, your contact information, where you live, all that stuff. And they know that, this gun with this serial number belongs to this citizen of the state, okay? And there's two things that we can look at this. And is that the compliant citizens, okay, those that complied with the gun registration mandate, we can call them the docile people. And sure enough, they registered and they had their gun. Not a big deal, right? But then you had the non-compliant people, the people who were like, I ain't registering my gun. And in the Weimar Republic, those people were, generally speaking here, communists and Nazis, okay? Which is interesting because they were actually the more violent people when it came to politics, at least, okay? Now, what was the reason? What was the reason given by the government of the Weimar Republic for the gun registration mandate? Well, it was simple. It was public safety. Now, during this time, there was also confiscation of weapons, okay? Certain weapons that you couldn't have. And so there was confiscation of weapons. And then there was also the gun registration. So you had these two things going on. Well, what's the consequence here? Well, the consequence is not as, when you say it out loud, it doesn't sound that bad. But here's the consequence. The consequence is that the state now has a record of gun owners. And you might think to yourself, well, that's not so bad, And I want to register my weapon. We should be able to do that. That doesn't sound so bad. Okay. Well, maybe it doesn't sound so bad. But what happens next? Well, in 1933, the Nazis take over. Okay. And the first thing they do is they use the gun registration records to identify their threats and to go against their political opponents. And what was the common denominator? Well, they're looking at, okay, we know this person is a threat and we know this person is against us politically. Let's look at the gun registration records. And they were like, oh, yep, they own guns. Now they have this really valuable information. And what happens once these people get identified? Well, they get disarmed. And another thing happens, and this did happen during the Nazi regime, was that constitutional rights were suspended. And when they had the record of where these gun owners lived, well, now there was widespread illegal search and seizure going on. They're coming into your home, they're taking your weapons, and maybe even throwing you in jail in the process, okay? Gun clubs, okay? These were independently owned gun clubs. They were banned, okay? And the owners of those clubs were imprisoned. This started happening in Nazi Germany. And then, of course, you had the undesirables. And this is one of the things that happens. Anyone that the Nazis deemed undesirable, they decided they were just going to throw in prison. Well, why is that interesting? Well, we have language like that nowadays, right? And we hear it a lot from the left. And they speak of, for example, Trump supporters as deplorable people. Okay, remember Hillary Clinton saying that. And the idea behind this is that it paints a certain group of people with the widest brush possible in order to then be able to go and do something bad, usually not good, against them, okay? And so you can imagine something like this. You're a gun owner, and because you're a gun owner, well, there's a good chance that the people that live with you might be okay with you owning a gun. And so now they're also going to be thrown in a camp. It's really a jail, because you might also be a threat. And then anybody else who might have gone shooting with you, or may have, maybe bought a gun from you, or was just a friend of yours, they knew that you owned a gun, well, they might be a threat too. And so you can see how we can quickly then lump in a whole entire group of people into a category of undesirables or deplorable or something like that, and then target them, okay, as if they were evil doers in the societies, okay. And the last thing that we know happened here, obviously, was that Jews were targeted. Now, Jews were targeted specifically because the authorities that distributed firearms were told you cannot give a gun permit to any Jewish person. Now, this was interesting because by the time that 1938 came along, a few years later, the Gun Control Act was passed by Hitler. And one of the things that it did was it disarmed the Jews. And they used the records that the Weimar Republic had gotten with the gun registration to know where to go to get the guns from the Jews. So here you have a very innocent public safety policy, right, now being used by a tyrannical government, the Nazis in this case, to go target Jews. Well, why Jews? Just because they're Jews. Just because we want to. Well, there was the confiscation of their weapons. These same Jews, a lot of them, what happened was because here's a tactic that the government will use. They asked them, hey, would you surrender your arms? Would you volunteer your gun into the government? And people that would come with their guns and volunteer their weapons say, okay, I don't want to get in trouble. Here's my gun. They would then take those Jews and turn them over to the Gestapo. They would get arrested. And so it's a lose-lose situation, because if you volunteer it, you're going to go to the Gestapo. And if you don't, they're going to, illegally search and seize your property and still probably throw you in jail, if not kill you in the process. And so this is a devastating thing that's happening. And this is not a story. This is historical fact. Okay? Well, today, we're not telling people, hey, surrender your arms, but we'll do a community gun buyback program. Oh, yeah, you didn't know these exist. They exist here in Dallas, where I live. I looked it up. They exist where I used to live in Chicago. And gun buyback programs, they're real simple. If you have a gun that you just don't want anymore, or maybe it doesn't work, or maybe you just found it. We're not going to ask any question. You just come by and we're going to give you a $100 Visa gift card. Oh, wow, $100. Well, once you spend your $100, guess what? You're still disarmed. You're defenseless. Now, there's one particular people that never participate in these gun buyback programs. They're called criminals. Okay? For sure. And intelligent people that know their Second Amendment. Okay? And I don't mean intelligent in the sense of they got a higher IQ or something like that. I just mean people that know what the Second Amendment is and actually know the dangers of disarming citizens. Okay? Okay, so what happens after, the Jews are disarmed? Well, they are attacked. That's right. They get attacked. On November 9th, okay, the 9th of November, 9th and 10th, okay, so that night, in 1938, is called the Night of Broken Glass. This was a night where businesses and homes of Jews were broken into and burned down. I think it was hundreds of churches of synagogues were burned to the ground. Police didn't do nothing. They just kind of stepped back and let the rioters do what they were going to do. And they were specifically targeting Jewish people and their businesses and their homes. And the firemen were given orders by the government to not put out the fires at the synagogues. Let them burn. Okay? Which is extraordinary. I mean, not too long ago, not literally right down the block from where I live, old, and it was a pretty large church, burned to the ground. It was a 4-alarm fire, and I think those firefighters were there for at least 18, 20 hours fighting this fire. Just giving it all they can, doing whatever they can. They didn't just stand by. And so there's a message that is sent in there. And why was it called the Night of Broken Glass? Well, it was called the Night of Broken Glass because the streets were littered with broken glass all over. Kind of reminds you of the riots, the pandemic riots, right? The George Floyd riots that happened, where the streets were littered in broken glass. They were, businesses were set on fire. We can't say that some particular people were targeted. I think this was kind of a free-for-all. But it's a form of this kind of craziness that happens. The problem as well was that over 30,000 Jewish men were arrested that night. Okay? They were arrested because they were Jewish, by the way, for no other reason. And so this was a devastating night. And here's the problem. It was all planned. The reason that they disarmed the people was because they were planning this night. They were planning this attack. And so in order for it to be easier, they had to disarm the people of their weapons. And so if by now you're not seeing the dangers of disarming the citizens, then I don't know if I can help you. I only got a few more pages here, so maybe I can help you. But if by now you're not seeing it, I don't know if I can help you. So there's an order to this chaos, isn't there? Well, the first thing you do is you disarm. The second thing you do is you create a spark. We'll talk about that here in a second. And the third thing that you do is attack. Now, the spark for the night in 1938, November 9th and 10th, was that a young Jewish man, in a fit of rage, apparently, killed a German diplomat. And this was used to say, look, this is how all Jewish people are. And boy, when the whole George Floyd thing happened, all cops are like this and all white people are like this. And you just started hearing these broad statements. Okay. The pandemic was the same way. oh, these anti-vaxxers or anti-mask people, they're gonna kill us, right? And you hear this like over thing. So they use this thing to spark this chaos, and usually what follows is riots. Okay, so this was planned. Now, and there's some proof that some of these riots were also planned to happen here in the United States. Now, I want to say something here because I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that our current administration, okay, President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and the entire administration and the people that are in power right now, I'm not saying that they're Nazis. I'm not saying that, okay? The word Nazi gets thrown around a lot. The reason that I use the story of the Nazis here was because I wanted to pinpoint the fact of how they use gun control laws in order to disarm the people so that then they can attack their own people. But the problem is that the policies, okay, so let's say our government is more like the Weimar Republic. Okay, they just want to progress. They just want to give people a chance to live in peace and public safety. All catchwords that we hear nowadays, aren't they? Well, what if we're just another version of the Weimar Republic, and we're setting up all of these, essentially taking away, eroding the constitutional rights of people in this country, so that at a moment's notice, whenever the spark occurs, we have a despotic government that takes over, a tyrannical government that takes over, and they'll use those very laws against us. And so if you're a person that is anti-gun and anti the Second Amendment, you really have to consider that these kinds of policies may not make you a Nazi necessarily. I wouldn't call you a Nazi, but they do create a Nazi kind of culture, or I would say a tyrannical kind of culture. Now, that's a problem because in some ways we are living in an anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment culture. But we have to ask a question. If we are to disarm the entire population, all the citizens, what is that replaced with? And I would tell you it's going to be replaced with a standing army. It's exactly what the British tried to do. Okay, so you don't want to hear about Nazis. Okay, let's talk about the British. The British, they were so bad, were they? They just wanted to take the guns away from the colonists. That's all they wanted to do, and take away their ammunition and their gunpowder. And then they just shipped over all their soldiers on boats so they could stand guard. So that all we're doing, we're just replacing the militia with an army. That's all we're doing. That's a problem. Now, why? Why do we have such an anti-gun culture in so many places in America? Well, I think it's because, and maybe you never thought about it this way, but I think about it this way. I think it's because there's an overemphasis on equality and equity. And why do I say that? Well, everyone from BLM all the way to pro-Palestinian groups, if you read their websites and the literature they put out, equality is such a big word that they use. They use it for everything. And the more I think about the word equality, in the way that it's used on the left particularly, really makes no sense. There's one thing for sure that we could say that we're equals in, and that we're equal, biblically speaking. Okay, now throw a little word in here for you. Biblically speaking, we're all equal in that we are made in the image of God. Christians teach this language of equality in that within the church, within the brotherhood of Christianity, right? There is no man, woman, Jew, Gentile, right? What happens? That is done away with because we've come into the body of Christ and we're united, equal in Christ. Okay? But this idea that is pushed often by the left of equality is equality in the weirdest things. Sexuality, abortion, like weird, just social kind of almost made up stuff. Stuff that you think to yourself, you're like, well, how are we equal at all in that regard? And so once you push beyond the simple idea of equality, that we're all made equal, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, right? That once we get past that, there's no equality is no longer broad. That definition that I just gave you of equality that we find in the Declaration of Independence, for example, that's a very broad definition. Everybody says, yeah, it's true. We are all made equal. But then when you try to push that, whether it be to money, position, power, opportunity, okay, when you try to make all those things equal, you're no longer talking broadly. Because the collective itself actually harms the individual. There is no individuality in the collective. But the problem is that the collective is made up of individuals. So every individual has to give up a whole lot of who they are as individuals in order to feel equal among the collective. And this is a huge issue, particularly when it comes to guns, because, well, listen, we need everybody to be part of this collective. And we know that you want to keep your gun, but you're just not going to be allowed to keep your gun. Well, here's the problem with this thought of equality that we find in the ideology of the collective here. And it's that it harms certain things, and it harms particularly the three tenets that I've talked about that are kind of at the top of the hierarchy of natural rights, which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, how does disarming citizens, okay, in order to appease the collective, okay, how does that actually hurt when it comes to life? Well, self-defense. If you take my natural right to be able to have a weapon to defend myself, okay, and that is the best way that I could defend myself. And by the way, if you're going to argue with me that, you know, when someone breaks into your home, you know, me having a shotgun or a gun is not the best way for me to defend myself, that I should have like learned judo or something, you're out of your mind, okay? Because at 3 a.m, when you're pretty tired and someone's breaking into your home or someone's trying to hurt you or you're being mugged, okay, the best option you have really to be able to defend yourself is to have a weapon. Again, if you know, I'm down to 3 pages here. If you're not getting it, I don't know how much I can help you, okay? But this is the idea here, okay? So it attacks life because it essentially tells you, when people say you don't have the right, okay, or I'm against the Second Amendment, it's saying to you, you don't have a right to defend yourself against an individual attack, or worse, an attack from the state. Okay, we talked about this last week. You know, if the federal government wants to come and attack Texas, for example, they're going to have to contend with all the gun owners here. This was the same problem that the Brits thought about. When Great Britain were thinking about doing what they had to do to try to really impose their power on the colonists, they knew there were about 100,000 colonists that all owned guns and knew how to use them. And you think about this, you know, because, you know, you often think about, well, even if the federal government wants to attack us, you know, they got missiles and they've got, you know, ships and they got airplanes, they'll overwhelm us. No, it's not necessarily the case. Because you have to contend with all of these single individuals, and you're not going to be able to contain them all. And so there is something to this point. We'll try to cover that here in a few minutes. The other thing that it hurts here with the collective is the liberty. Okay, so you have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we've explained how it attacks life. How does it attack liberty? Well, it attacks liberty because when it says we have the right to keep and bear arms, okay, there's a variety there, at least as I understand this. And one of the liberties that is often taken away is language that says that's an assault weapon or an assault rifle, and they want to take that away. Or if your gun has a large capacity magazine, they want to take that away. Or if you have a bump stock on your weapon, they want to take that away. And so there's this constant push that comes from those in the government, typically from the left, that are constantly nitpicking, okay, at your weapon. And if we let them keep doing this, and this attack on our liberty to have the variety of weapons and know how to use them, you'll end up, with laws that say that a 6-shot pistol is too dangerous. It's a weapon of mass destruction or something. We joked last week that they'll just allow you to defend yourself with the blunt end of a pencil. Okay, and so we have to be very careful with this. And then there's the pursuit of happiness. Well, how is it attacking the pursuit of happiness? This whole idea of disarming the citizen. Well, if you have an inability to protect, okay, that equals an inability to pursue. Okay, so if you can't protect what you work so hard to keep, and to protect the family you've built, you got your wife and your kids and grandkids, let's say, and you have all these things and you can't protect them, well, how can you keep pursuing these things? If at any point in time, someone stronger than you or with a illegal gun can now come into your property and take what's yours. And so in every way that we look at the disarming of citizens, it affects life, liberty, and happiness. It affects natural rights. And any policy that takes away a natural right is not, even though they might want to claim it as good for society, good for public safety, it's a right that everyone should have. It's not a natural right if it infringes upon natural rights. It's that simple. And I know I keep saying stuff like this, and I'll probably keep saying it for every one of these amendments because it's crucial to understand that, okay? So, again, the de facto idea here would be if you have no protection, you have no possession, okay? If you can't protect something, you can't possess it. Somebody will take it away from you. Now, the rebuttal to this, I think, would be something like, well, can't man be good, though? People are nice. They're not just gonna take your stuff. Come on, man. You're talking like people are just gonna be, killing each other and doing all kinds of stuff. Like I would never kill no one. I would never steal nothing from my neighbors or anything like that. I just won't do that. Well, here's the problem. I might say to you, well, okay, an individual could be reasonably good. From a biblical perspective, no one's good but God, right? But let's say you're reasonably good. Okay, you're a decent person. But collectives are generally bad. And the problem is that when you're disarming the citizens, it's an ideology that's coming from a point of collective. Okay, why is that? Okay, I hope I'm explaining this right because this is important. Because if you're trying to take the right of the individual, you have to replace it with the right of the collective, okay? And those are the two arguments that jump out when we look at the Second Amendment. Is the right to bear arms a collective right, or is it an individual right? Okay, and I contend, along with, most people that study this properly, and I don't know, that's probably not even right, because, there's people that study this stuff and just don't care. And they're gonna paint it and kind of, tilt it to whatever it is that they want. But as far as I understand this, okay, it's an individual, right? And we tried to explain that in the first episode. So if you haven't seen that, please go back to the previous episode. But what the avoidance here, and this is true back to what the founding fathers and framers thought of when they put the Second Amendment there, was this is going to help to protect against the tyranny of the majority, because the collective becomes the majority, right? Most people, they're like, oh, anti-gun, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Yeah, let's change the Second Amendment. Let's take that out. We don't need that. And all of a sudden, you're being terrorized, okay, by the majority, okay? And so the only way against that is through the militia. So let's talk about the militia here real quick, okay? Well, what is the militia? The militia is not the National Guard, okay? It is not solely a organization built for defense and protection of natural rights, let's say, that is only at the sole disposal of the state or the government. Now, there's usefulness in a National Guard, okay? So if you have a massive amount of people that are being increasingly disruptive and violent, okay, and destructive, you can have a National Guard that comes in and has a show of force in order to protect the natural rights of the people to have property, to have peace, okay, all of these things. We understand that. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? I want you to get that. But the militia, as it was understood by the framers and the founders, was not a National Guard, okay? It was not a state-sponsored militia. The militia was made up of ordinary men and women, okay? Probably at that time more men. I'm sure there were some women that had weapons and carried, but I've never studied that, so I'm not sure. But I assume it was generally men. But it's made up of ordinary people, okay? That here's just 4 things that I want you to think about here, okay, with militia. Again, ordinary people that keep and bear arms, okay? That's what the militia would be. That's a simple definition, or the most simple definition I can think of. But there's 4 components I want you to think of here. 1, that militia of ordinary men that keep and bear arms is a threat. It's a threat to a potential tyrannical state. Okay, now when you read Romans 13 in the Bible, one of the biggest lessons that you get out of that is that the government is there to essentially be a bulwark to terrorize the evildoer. Okay, but sometimes the government itself becomes the evildoer. So the militia, the ordinary men and women, okay, the people that are armed, become the threat because it's always existing. It's not controlled by the state. It's not controlled by the government. It's not under any particular kind of rule. It simply exists. In a free country like ours, it's a part of the organism, as it were, okay? Not only are they a threat, that's the first component. The second is that this militia, okay, has a collective way of thinking in a way, if you want to put it that way. And is that they, among themselves, distribute their arms, they distribute weapons. So you got gun store owners, right? You got gun shows, you got private sellers, you've got, gun manufacturers, you got all these things that kind of all work together to provide and distribute weapons. And then there's also training, okay? There's training schools. There's places where you can go and learn combat training. There's places where you can go to learn self-defense, how to use your weapon safety, all kinds of things. This is very natural, okay? The third component, all of these people that are part of the militia, that consider themselves part of this militia that exists as a threat, that is distributing weapons and is trained, they know that their weapons are for self-defense only. That is not the same case if you replace that with an army. Because an army stands on the offensive, not on the defensive. They're there to make you follow the rules that have been established, and they will use force. We've seen this, okay? We've seen this in history. The militia does not do that. The militia stands there in defense. They go about their daily lives. They do what they do. But when their natural rights are being increasingly attacked, and it's not even at the first sign, it's when they see a constant now infringement of rights, then they have to pick up arms. Okay, that's why they're there. And the fourth thing they do is they teach others. Okay, so it's a mindset that is taught from generation to generation. Okay, this is why we still have many, many millions of people in the United States who are firm believers in the Second Amendment, because they've learned these things. Okay, and so part of what I want to do with this is to, at least if you don't know these things and you happen to come across this podcast, is for you to understand why that is. Okay, so that you don't feel threatened and you don't feel like, well, why so many people want their guns? That's just stupid, right? But people think that way. No, it's not stupid. It's not dumb. There's an important reason why. And you'd be shocked to know how many people don't know that. So we need to make sure that people know that, okay? And this is something you see in the militia. They teach others, okay? Now, some critics would say, well, isn't that just a de facto army? You know, if they're prepping themselves and they got all these weapons, isn't that like an army? That sounds kind of scary. Well, it's not the same at all, though. I already told you, one stands for the offensive and the other stands for the defensive position, okay? The colonists had armed themselves. Now, you know, they didn't have, eventually they formed an army, but what they had before that was a threat to Britain was the militia. That's what they had. And they knew they needed this. They knew that without that, they would not have won. Okay. Now, we are in an impasse here, okay, in a way. Because I want you to think about this. Think about your house. Think about your spouse. Think about your children, your pets, okay? Your car, your property, everything that you have that's yours, that you hold dear, those people that you love that are around, your family, your friends, all this that you have acquired in your life that you have, okay? If the government disarms you, you have no recourse if they come to take it all away. None. I don't care how much you talk to them. I don't care how good your words are. I don't care how influential you might be. When the tyrant wants to take what's yours, they will take it. And so the reality that you have to come to on this is that the militia, the way that we've described it here, and I believe is accurate as far as I understand it, from a historical point of view, is the only thing that stands in the way of a tyrannical state. Is to say, I will never give up my gun. And so when you hear people say that, you won't take my gun away. When you learn your Texas history and they say, come and take it. When they had their cannon and Mexico wanted it, and they were like, well, come and take it. Okay? It's because they knew if they gave it up, they would lose it all. This is a sad reality. It's part of the fallen world that we live in. Okay? It's a God-given right because we have to be able to protect ourselves. Because people are bad. Not everybody is really nice like you are, given that you're a nice person. I'm just giving you that. Okay? So this is really, really important. Now, the last thing that I want to kind of touch on here might be I don't think I've said too much stuff that's offensive today. But maybe you've been offended by something I said, but you'll probably be very offended now, particularly if you are more anti-gun or don't like the Second Amendment. You might get pretty offended now. So I've warned you. Okay. People that defend natural rights, okay, people that deeply believe that God has created us, that He's created us equal. We have certain unalienable rights, natural rights that are given to us by God. People that protect those rights, they tilt towards moral goodness. I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm not saying they don't sin. I'm not saying that, there's some bad apples in there. I'm saying, generally speaking, they tilt towards moral good. People that are, for example, anti the Second Amendment, pro massive gun control, pro a collective right of gun controls versus the individual right. These are also people that infringe upon life, liberty, and happiness, as we've described earlier. And they tilt, towards evil. And so there's a fundamental problem here, The fundamental problem is that if, for the sake of your collective, of your group, whatever group that is, and we can even think of this beyond just the Second Amendment, When you want to infringe on the right of others because of your group, you are actually tilting toward evil. And that's a fundamental difference between those kinds of people. This is something that I've written about, and I haven't put it out there yet, but it's a big project that I'm working on. Who knows when I'll finish it. And it's that idea of the fundamental difference between good and evil. And so the warning here is, if you find yourself constantly siding with the collective for the group mentality, for the herd mentality, for the public safety, all of these kind of, terms that we're hearing, particularly right now, unfortunately coming from the left, you have to ask yourself, am I tilting towards evil? Am I willing to take away the rights of others so that we could have a collective right? You have to really think about that. The people that are typically anti the Second Amendment are usually the same people that want to force you to use certain pronouns. They want to force diversity on you versus meritocracy. They want to force abortion on you versus life. They want to force LGBTQ, trans, gender, drag, queer, whatever you want to call it, ideology on children. They're the same people that want to censor you, These are the same people that are working at places like YouTube and Facebook. We're seeing it right now with so many of the news, that's going around about the Trump assassination. It doesn't autofill. They're not talking about certain things. There's all this kinds of censorship that's happening. A lot of the censorship that was happening on Twitter, for example, before Elon Musk took over, was against people that stood on the right of issues, and so we see this becoming a huge problem. But I want to give you a way out. And your way out is that if you become a supporter of the Second Amendment because you understand the things that we're talking about, here's the good news. You haven't become a righty. You haven't become a right-winger or a right-wing nut. You haven't become the quintessential gun owner. You haven't become red. You haven't gone conservative. All you've done is you've moved to the center. That's all you've done. You see, the idea of militia, the idea of the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, is a centrist idea. It was supported by Federalists and Anti-Federalists, meaning it was supported by those that wanted a strong federal central government and those that believe more in the rights of the state. It was believed, if you want to think about it, by people that were both on the right and the left. They knew the one thing that we cannot do is allow the state to disarm the people. If we do that, we lose it all. So it's a centrist position. It's not a right position. I know that it seems like it is. I know that the people that push it are typically on the right. I know they typically wear MAGA hats and you might not like. But the truth is, it's a centrist idea. All you're saying is we have to have, a means with which to protect ourselves against tyrannical government and against individuals that want to harm us. That's all you're saying. And so the problem is, as we conclude here, is that our rights are under attack. Freedom of speech is under attack. Freedom of religion is under attack. Freedom of the press is under attack. And now also we have the freedom to keep and bear arms is under attack. And properly understanding the right to bear arms is simple. It's the last line of defense that we have to keep the freedom that we have. And I think that's something that we can at least try to get around and understand. And maybe if some people agree with me here, maybe we'll start seeing less of the vitriol when it comes to this particular topic. So that's all I have on this. I don't think that we will be doing another session on the Second Amendment because we have 8 other amendments that we have to look at. So we're going to be focusing on those. I do want to tell you, if you've listened this long, to please subscribe, like, follow. Go to mindofmiz.com/subscribe and subscribe to our website there. Become a member of the Mind of Miz. And we're going to be on Thursday. We're going to be live, although I don't know when I'm releasing this, but every Thursday we are live. Okay, so keep an eye out for that. We were live on YouTube, Facebook, X, and Rumble. I think I said them all right. And so be a part of that. That's usually when we do our Bible study, which we're going to be doing again. So we do appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Mind of Miz podcast. Thanks.